America's 13 Scariest Serial Killers. 1. Ted Bundy. How many years he spent in prison? About 13 years before his execution in the electric chair. How many victims? 20 confirmed, 30 recognized, from 36 to 100 potential murders in total. First on our list is Ted Bundy. We have already mentioned this serial killer in an article on the phenomenon of fan communities that appear around the name of a famous maniac. Why did Ted Bundy end up on this list? It has been established that this serial killer, who committed his crimes in the United States, killed 30 young women and children before he turned 30 years old. The famous Bundy magazine about life, cheese and intermediate states, royal cheese. Are you his charm and charisma? And he conducted criminal activity for 4 years, in the period from 1974 to 1978. The story of Ted Bundy caused a public outcry, as he escaped from prison twice. During the second escape, he managed to kill 3 more people. His victims were 2 women and 1 12-year-old girl. The serial killer's life ended in the electric chair on January 24, 1989, when he was 42 years old. 2. David Berkowitz. How many years he spent in prison? 46 years. Currently incarceration continues. How many victims? 6 confirmed. David Berkowitz is also known as Son of Sam and the .44 caliber killer. This serial killer operated on the streets of New York for about a year between July 1976 and July 1977. Initially, the media dubbed him the .44 caliber killer in honor of his favorite weapon, which he used to kill 6 people on the streets of New York. Berkowitz was nicknamed Son of Sam because he initially stated in his confession that the devil dog of Sam's neighbor ordered him to commit a journal about life, cheese, and intermediate states, royal cheese. A crime. There is also evidence that Berkowitz called himself Sam during his arrest. Maybe it's about a split personality or David Berkowitz's desire to demonstrate his insanity. Nevertheless, the court found Berkowitz sane and accountable for his crimes. The serial killer was sentenced to several terms, the total term of which was 365 years. David has already applied for parole several times, but all these applications have been rejected. 3. Charles Manson. How many years he spent in prison? He spent 40 years in prison, died on November 19, 2017. How many victims? 6 confirmed. The terrible Manson family is associated with a large number of different kinds of crimes. Manson conducted his activities in the 60s and 70s of the last century. Manson organized a mystical cult around his person, consisting mainly of young women. One of the most scandalous stories is connected with the name of actress Sharon Tate, Roman Polanski's wife. She and 5 other people died on the night of August 8 to 9, 1969 at the hands of members of the sect of Charles Manson. This murder became extremely high profile because Sharon was a magazine about life, cheese and intermediate states, royal cheese. In the 9th month of pregnancy. Another mystical fact shrouding this story is related to the fact that a little earlier Roman Polanski acted as a director in a film about the child of Satan. The film is called Rosemary's Baby. This intense mystical story has something in common with the cult of Manson, who is also considered to be associated with various kinds of satanic rituals. In general, this story is quite creepy, and therefore it deserves to be in 3rd place on our list. 4. Ed Gein. How many years he spent in prison? 26 years. Died in custody in 1984. How many victims? 1 confirmed, 2 recognized, 5 suspected. Ed Gein was convicted of the murder of only 1 woman. Still, that didn't stop him from getting the nickname, the Plainfield Butcher. He is known as a terrible serial killer for the reason that a whole collection of things made of human remains was found in his house. For example, in his house, the authorities found a belt made of nipples, as well as leggings, a corset, seats and a lampshade made of human skin. Gein confessed to only 2 crimes, as well as the theft of bodies from a magazine about life, cheese and intermediate states, royal cheese. Are you 9 graves? There are suspicions that Ed kept silent about other crimes committed. Gain pleaded not insane, but was placed in a psychiatric hospital at the Waupun prison, where he spent the rest of his life, until 1984. The killer died at the age of 77. It is believed that this serial killer became the prototype of characters like Norman Bates from Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 thriller Psycho and Buffalo Bill from Thomas Harris's novel The Silence of the Lambs, released in 1988. 5. The Zodiac. How many years he spent in prison? The identity of the perpetrator has not been established. How many victims? From 5 to 37 alleged victims. In the late 60s, Zodiac became America's most wanted serial killer. The killer called himself Zodiac in letters that he sent to regional newspapers. In them, he claimed to have killed more than 37 people. His letters contained 4 ciphers, 2 of them still remain unsolved, and the most famous is a magazine about life, cheese, and intermediate states, Royal Cheese.ru. The 340 ciphers were cracked 51 years later by a team of 3 people. In 2021, a team of investigators stated that the Zodiac was Gary Francis Post, who died in 2018. However, the FBI did not confirm this information, as representatives of the law considered the evidence to be indirect. So the case remained unsolved. 6. Richard Ramirez. How many years he spent in prison? 23 years. Died in prison. How many victims? 13 recognized. More than 20 alleged victims. Richard Ramirez has become another of the most terrifying serial killers in America. He was accused not only of murders, but also of numerous other crimes, including sexual assault and robbery. He was also nicknamed the Night Hunter. Ramirez conducted criminal activity for a little more than a year, from July 1984 to August 1985, a magazine about life, cheese, and intermediate states, Royal Cheese.ru. Ramirez was interested in the occult and the use of various prohibited substances. He was nicknamed the Night Hunter because he committed most of the crimes at night. Richard Ramirez used pistols, a knife, and hammers as the murder weapon. He beat and strangled the victims and was so cruel that in one case he trampled a man to death. 7. Eileen Wuornos. How many years she spent in prison? 12 years, then the death penalty. How many victims? 7 victims. Eileen Wuornos worked as a prostitute, and 7 men died at her hands. She committed her first murder in November 1989, shooting 51-year-old convicted rapist Richard Mallory. After that, Wuornos killed 6 more men. She explained her actions by saying that they all tried to rape her. The criminal was arrested when she was released by a magazine about life, cheese, and intermediate states, Royal Cheese.ru. The fingerprints matched those found in the car of one of the victims. She was sentenced to death for her crimes in the early 90s, but was not executed until 2002, after serving 12 years on death row. Charlize Theron won the Academy Award for Best Actress for playing Wuornos in the movie Monster, released in 2003. 8. John Wayne Gacy. How many years she spent in prison? 12 years, then the death penalty by injection. How many victims? 33 recognized murders. Another serial killer worked as a clown at charity events and killed young men and boys for 6 years. John Wayne Gacy is notable for the fact that, like Chikatilo, one of the most famous maniacs in Russia, he seemed to live an ordinary life. Gacy had a wife and 2 children, and at first he did not arouse much suspicion from the police. A series of murders began in 1972, a magazine about life, cheese, and intermediate states, Royal Cheese.ru, when John married his second wife Carol. An American serial killer buried the bodies of 29 young people under his Chicago home and in the basement, and he drowned 4 more victims in the Des Plaines River. In total, after his sentence, Gacy spent about 14 years in death row, and then was subjected to the death penalty. His last wish was fried shrimp and a bucket of chicken wings from KFC. 9. Jeffrey Dahmer. How many years he spent in prison? 3 years, after which he was killed by a prisoner in prison. How many victims? 16 recognized and 17 alleged victims. Jeffrey Dahmer is known in the media as the Cannibal of Milwaukee or the Monster of Milwaukee. This serial killer from America gained notoriety for storing photographs of his victims' body parts. Dahmer committed crimes with a special level of cruelty in the period from 1978 to 1991. The Milwaukee Monster was caught at the moment, and the potential victim of the maniac Tracy Edwards was able to calm the killer and escape from him. The police found a magazine about life, cheese and intermediate states, royal cheese. R.U. Dahmer's apartment has enough evidence to understand that they are facing a maniac. Among them are numerous pictures of dismembered bodies and the murder weapon, a huge bloody knife. And although the serial killer was diagnosed with borderline and schizotypal personality disorder, as well as a psychotic disorder, he was found sane. After 3 years in prison since July 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer was killed by one of the other prison inmates. 10. Edmund Kemper. How many years he spent in prison? 50 years, and continues to be incarcerated in a California medical facility. How many victims? 10 victims. Another scary story is connected with the name of Edmund Kemper, a serial killer with a mental disorder. It was he who became the prototype of one of the main characters of the Netflix series, Mindhunter, the first season of which was released in 2017. The real Kemper was about 210 centimeters tall and weighed 127 kilograms. As a teenager, he killed his own grandparents, and later his mother, her friend, and 6 students. Edmund's alarming symptoms have been observed since early childhood. First he killed cats, and then at the age of 14 he killed relatives with whom he lived. When Kemper turned 21, he was released, after which he killed 6 college students. The first magazine about life, cheese and intermediate states, Royal Cheese.ru. This Kemper was nicknamed the student killer. And then he took on his own mother and her friend to fake his escape. However, the Kemper did not run away and called the police in order to surrender. At first, the officers did not believe the guy. It is not every day that murderers call the hotline in order to confess their own crimes. And yet, when Edmund called the station again to talk to an employee he knew personally, he was arrested. So it was possible to solve 6 more crimes committed by him earlier. Edmund has been in custody since 1973. That is, for 50 years. The death penalty, which Edmund Kemper had requested for himself, was denied to him. 11. Dennis Rader. How many years he spent in prison? 18 years, and continues to be in prison. How many victims? 10 proven, 5 victims survived. Dennis Rader is a well-known serial killer in America who disappeared and then returned and committed 10 more murders. The Rader committed murders between 1974 and 1991. Rader liked to share the details of his crimes without being caught. His crimes include the murder of 2 children and their parents. This horrific event took place in Kansas in 1974 and was the beginning of a series of murders of a Rader. After 1991, the serial killer lay low and did not make himself felt. In times of calm heat, a magazine about life, cheese and intermediate states, Royal Cheese. R.U. From childhood, he led the life of a family man, a scout leader, and a church president. However, the plot, which was dedicated to the unknown killer, released in 2004, 30 years after his first terrible crime, returned the maniac to his former excitement. He started sending letters and evidence to the police again. And yet luck turned against the Rader. A year later, his police managed to track down the maniac. The Rader's DNA matched the one found at one of the crime scenes. After that, the American serial killer was sentenced to life in prison. 12. Samuel Little. How many years he spent in prison? 8 years. Died in custody. How many victims? 93 victims, 50 confirmed. Samuel Little is an American serial killer who has killed the largest number of people. In 35 years, he managed to take the lives of 95 people. Little received a prison sentence for breaking into a furniture store, and then 26 more times in 11 states over a 9-year period. In 1982, he was accused of murdering a 22-year-old woman, but Little was released for lack of hard evidence. Later, he was taken back to the police on suspicion of killing a magazine about life, cheese, and intermediate states, royal cheese.ru, the murder of another woman. However, there was not enough evidence there either. Then in San Diego he was imprisoned for assaulting 2 women, but 2.5 years later Samuel was already free. Throughout this time, before the prison and later, after he got out of it, the maniac continued to kill people. The series of murders continued until September 5, 2012. Little died at the end of 2020 at the age of 80. 13. Gary Ridgway. How many years he spent in prison? 22 years and continues to be in prison. How many victims? 48 victims. The estimated number is 71. Gary Ridgway is another killer who has a large number of victims, mostly young girls and women. He started killing women in 1982, and Ridgway was caught only in March 2001. It took the police a little over 20 years to expose this serial killer. Many of his victims were under 15 years old. My magazine is about life, cheese, and intermediate states, royal cheese.ru. Ridgway's children died of suffocation. As a result, Ridgway was found guilty of 48 counts. In exchange for information about the details of the crimes and a confession of guilt, the police spared the criminal's life. This is the only way he managed to avoid the death penalty. Now one of America's most feared serial killers continues to serve a life sentence in prison.